Welcome back to another episode of Duker Sports. I am Dylan Duker. To my left is the one and only Christian Lunday. Happy to have him as always on the show. So, the last episode we talked about the wild card weekend and how great it was. Today, we're talking about the divisional round and how much better it's going to be than wild card weekend. And that's saying something because I really enjoyed the games last week. Other than that, we're going to be talking about. So we're going to give you the preview. We're going to give you a few points about each game, and then we're going to give you our score predictions. And then one thing I thought would be fun is to talk about the biggest vulnerability that each team has. I saw it online today, and I was like, "That's a great question." And so we're going to answer that as well. So, what's the biggest weakness for each of the 8 remaining teams? And so we're going to go in order of the games that are going to get played. And we're going to start off here with Jaguars and Chiefs. Christian, did you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. I have the Jaguars losing 21-34 to the Kansas City Chiefs. Last time they met, it was a pretty similar score, not quite the same. I do have the Chiefs dropping another 34 points. I think this is the best offense in the league. I don't think that there's another team that can put up this many points consistently. I know Dak, since he came back, has scored like 30 points, 32 points a game or something like that in the regular season, or some weird stat like that, but I don't think he scores as consistently as the Chiefs. I think they get it done on Saturday.
Very nice. You talk about similar scores to the first time they played. Well, I'll give you a similar score. How about the exact same score? Because I've got the Chiefs winning at 27-17.
Oh,
Now, just because I've got the exact same score does not mean that these teams are the exact same as they were the last time they played. Both of these teams, I think, well, definitely the Jaguars are playing much better. The Chiefs are doing what they do. They always play well. Um, I've got the Chiefs winning because of a few reasons we're going to talk about later for the biggest vulnerabilities. But Patrick Mahomes picked apart this defense the last time they played. He threw 4 touchdowns. I think that he'll probably do the same or close to it. So I do expect the score to be very similar. I think Jacksonville will have the opportunity to score more points. I think they're going to pass up on some field goal opportunities. I think they're going to be aggressive, and I think they're going to fail on a few of those fourth down opportunities, which will leave them stuck at 17 points for the game. But that's my prediction for that one.
nice. I can see that being the outcome as well. Moving on to the next game, Giants at Eagles. I have the Giants getting utterly wrecked, 13-27. I think the Eagles, with a week of rest, come back healthy, rejuvenated, and they lay it on the Giants.
My confidence level is not as high as yours. Fly Eagles fly, but I've got the Eagles winning this one 24-23. Last week I predicted a 1 point game. It came true. I hope I'm wrong here. I would much rather it be 27-13, but I think this game's going to be extremely close. A few things or a few reasons why. First of all, the last time we played this team, 2 weeks ago, we played against their backups, and we literally won that game 22-16 against their backups, and that's embarrassing. We barely beat them. The Giants, I think, were the third best team last weekend of the teams that played. I think they played a fantastic game. If they play to that caliber, I am deathly afraid that this team could beat us. Now, and when I say us, I was talking about the Eagles. I shouldn't say us, but they're going to beat. I think they could beat the Eagles. The Eagles did sweep them this year. They beat them 48-22 in the one game where both team stars played, and then they only beat them 22-16 when the Eagles starters played the Giants backups. Doesn't make sense to me. Although the Eagles do play down to their opponents, as many great teams do. Unfortunately, they're not going to be able to do that this time around. If they play down in any capacity, if they play the way they've played the last 3 times they've taken the field, I think they might lose this game, but I've got it being a 1 point game.
Wow. Yeah, I think the Giants are overperformers. I think that speaks to how good of a coach Brian Daboll is, but you are more generous to them than myself. The next game, I think, is the game of the week, in my opinion. It's Bengals Bills. I think there's a lot of tension buildup considering their last time they met. This game ended in tragedy and had to be called off. So I think this time there's a lot of emotions riding high. I think the Bills and Bengals are both preeminent offenses that are prolific in nature, have a lot of skill position players that are top of the line. But I think the Bills come out on top on this one. I think it's 36-31 Bills.
So I also think the Bills are going to win this game. I've got the Bills winning this one 31-24. Both of these teams, well, for sure, the Bills are going to have to play better in this matchup. They looked like crap. I'll just say that. They looked like crap last weekend. They gave up 31 to the Dolphins, but it was their offense that gave up 31. I'm going to say, not the defense. I think the defense played fine.
Yeah.
But the offense is sloppy. And it's crazy because you had the perfect situation. You had the others on the team, Dawson Knox, Gabriel Davis stepping up. They still gave up 31 points because they kept turning the ball over. And in this game, I think the difference is going to be the Bills' pass rush is going to get to Joe Burrow because of that line. And actually, I'll save because I want to save some of these things for the vulnerabilities that we're going to talk about later. So we'll move on to the next game. I'll go into more detail later.
Fair enough. The next game, I have what I think to be the best team in football versus the Cowboys. 49ers 28, Cowboys 16. I think the 49ers have a stake to being the best defense in all of the NFL, and I think the Cowboys, their streak of 30 points with Dak at quarterback ends against this team. The 49ers, I think Brock Purdy continues his streak of prolific passing. I think with all these weapons that San Francisco has, the Cowboys defense just can't keep up. I think they neutralize Micah Parsons by running at him instead of away from him with Christian McCaffrey. And I think the 49ers get it done.
So you said the last matchup was going to be your game of the week. This, to me, is the game of the week. In my opinion, I actually think this will be better than the Bills versus the Bengals because of the injuries to the Bengals offensive line. I've got this game going 26-20. I think these two teams were the top two teams in the league last week. They both dominated their opponents. They both played fantastic on both sides of the ball. And I think that this is going to be an epic showdown. And I'm actually rooting for the Cowboys because assuming the Eagles win, I'd much rather play the Cowboys than your number one team in the league because they look more like the number one team to me all the time. I had them fourth in my final power rankings, but after watching last week's game, and it was hard to find one of their vulnerabilities. We're going to talk about that later, but this team is fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. I think the 49ers just have just players all across the board. But speaking of biggest vulnerabilities, let's move on to the Jaguars, who I have on deck first. Talk about their vulnerabilities. I have their pass rush. So in my notes, I have their pass rush, which was ranked 25 or 25th in the league in sacks this year. I think outside of Josh Allen, they don't have any prominent pass rushers, and I think that Mark Schlereth quoted his dad, Herb Schlereth, that luck smells an awful lot like perspiration, as in teams make their own luck. But I think whatever luck that Jacksonville is either making or benefiting from, I think that clearly ends on Saturday. And I think part of the reason is that they won't be able to get to Patrick Mahomes. And I think this is going to be the biggest nail in their coffin.
So you were specific, and I was a little more vague on this, but we went different ways to get the right answer. Because I said pass defense. Pass defense is their biggest weakness, and it's for multiple reasons. Not only is their pass rush terrible, but their secondary is not good either. They are 28th in the league in pass defense in terms of yardage allowed. And when you're going against Patrick Mahomes, that does not bode well. It does not bode well at all. He's the number one quarterback in the league. They have the number one passing offense in the league. That is going to be way too much for that team to overcome. And I think this vulnerability is going to be the death of Jacksonville. So good news. They have something to focus on in this year's offseason, whether it be through free agency or through the draft. fix that secondary, and this team has a ton of potential.
Yeah, I 100% agree. They can spend most of their draft capital on defense, which is probably where they need it the most. Moving on to my favorite team, the Chiefs. Their biggest vulnerability to me is their inexperienced secondary. So we have Trent McDuffie starting. He's a first round corner. Joshua Williams gets play time in the slot. Joshua Williams is a fourth rounder. Jalen Watson is our third string corner. He's a seventh rounder. These guys were all drafted this year, and you can tell that the inexperience is very prevalent because we actually allowed the most passing TDs this year with 33. So I think that the inexperience in the secondary is going to come into play in the playoffs this year. Hopefully not in a severe way because it's hard to call them rookies anymore, being that it's the end of the season and we're in crunch time. But I think this is the biggest vulnerability of the Chiefs, and I think it could come back to bite them in a major way this postseason.
I typically defer to you as the Chiefs expert. I like to think of myself as an expert of all 32 teams, but you definitely have me beat when it comes to Kansas City Chiefs. I looked for a weakness and I found one that I kind of thought was a little bit glaring, and that's going to be turnover differential. This is a team that is 23rd in turnover differential. They are 22nd in takeaways, and they had the 10th most turnovers on offense. So that they're both sides of the ball. They're not getting takeaways on defense, and they're giving the ball away on offense. And those two things are not a good combination. I don't think that's going to harm them enough in this game, given that the Jaguars' defense isn't that prolific. I think they're going to get away with it in this game. I don't expect them to turn the ball over a ton here. I expect them to have one, maybe two if it's a bad day. But I do think the Chiefs will win, and I don't think the turnover differential is going to be a deciding factor in this game. But in the next round, very well could be.
That's right. I am concerned about that as well. Moving on to the Giants here, their biggest vulnerability to me is their wide receiving core. They got a big free agent in Kenny Galladay. That has not panned out the way Giants fans thought it would. He's their leading receiver. He didn't even have 750 receiving yards this year, and that's their leading receiver. Outside of that, all of it together is still an anemic receiving core. And I think that this lack of weapons is going to be too much for Daniel Jones to basically overcome. And the reason why is because he had probably the best game of his career last week. But I don't know how many times he can stack an effort like that back to back to back to back. And he also had 17 carries. So they relied on him to run the ball to help kind of spur the offense forward. I just don't think that continues. And I don't think Daniel Jones right now is good enough to overcome the anemic receiving core of the Giants.
So I'm gonna go way away from your point here. No, not really. We agree again. Mine is lack of offensive weapons. You keep getting really specific, and I keep going the vague route. And when you say they acquired a big free agent addition, are you talking about big in stature? Because he's not putting up big numbers. Because in the last 3 years combined, Kenny Galladay hasn't had 1,000 yards combined in the last 3 seasons. He didn't do anything this year either.
They
And
paid
I
him
look
big
at this.
money, and outside of not big in statistics and production, it was big in expectations.
I like that. Big bankroll, big expectations, and he's 6'4". So maybe that's what you meant. But he's not big in production, and that's what matters the most. That's how you win football games. Outside of Kenny Galladay, obviously Saquon Barkley, they're going to need to feed Saquon Barkley, and they're going to have to let Daniel Jones be Daniel Jones. I actually think Daniel Jones has been having a great year. Obviously, last week I think was the best game of his career, but he's done this before, and he's also played well against the Eagles before. So I'm a little bit worried about that, but I think it's just lack of offensive weapons in general because they don't have great running back depth. So God forbid anything happens to Saquon Barkley, no one's going to be able to step up and take his place. I don't want that to happen. I never root for injuries. I don't care who they're for. But then a wide receiver, probably their best wide receiver right now is Isaiah Hodgins, and he has played extremely well, but he's not a great wide receiver. Darius Slayton is the number two. He's also been playing well. But when you look at these guys and you compare them to other receiving corps around the league, they don't stack up. They don't have a great tight end either. The only good thing about them right now, I would say on offense, is they have a great run game, obviously led by Saquon Barkley, but also uh, double-sided spear because you've got a quarterback who they call White Vic, and he can run the ball. So that behind a good offensive line, and then Daniel Jones has made great decisions on the field, so he's been able to make up for this. But I don't think he's going to be able to make up for this lack of weapons going against the number one team in the NFC.
Yeah, I think overall, I think you're spot on, mainly because you agree with me. Here at Duker Sports, we want our teams to beat other teams at their best. We don't want our teams to play lesser versions of other competitors. My light just ran out of battery, so we're just going to keep moving forward. Uh, Moving on to Dylan's favorite team, the Philadelphia Eagles. Just like he struggled to find vulnerabilities with a certain team that we're about to talk about, I struggled to find vulnerabilities with the Eagles. And like Dylan, I tend to defer to Dylan when it comes to the Eagles. But my biggest vulnerability for the Eagles is Jalen Hurts' health. If Jalen Hurts is healthy, they're going to make so much noise this playoff run. But if he's not healthy, I think that hampers what they can do on offense and mitigates a lot of the offensive output that their offense is actually traditionally capable of. So to me, this team will live and die by Jalen Hurts. And if he's compromised, this is a vulnerability for them.
So I actually am going to go away from you a little bit here, but in the same realm of things, we're talking about quarterback play. We're talking about the passing attack. And I think the Eagles love to pass the ball too much. And I think it stems from Nick Sirianni being a former wide receiver coach. I think that's a big reason why we brought in A.J. Brown in the offseason because he loves to pass the ball. And that's all fair and good and all that. You got Jalen Hurts as an MVP candidate. I don't think he's going to win. But this team is built to run the ball. We've got one of the best offensive lines in football. We have Jason Kelsey and Lane Johnson, who are two of the best players at the position, if not the best. Both of them were on the All-Pro team. Jordan Mailata is fantastic as well. We have Landon Dickerson. We have Isaac Seumalo. This line is fantastic, and they love to do the ground and pound game. And we got Miles Sanders, who's top 5 in the league in rushing this year as well. Yet it seems like all the time we put all the pressure, and we've been doing this for years in Philadelphia. We did it when Doug Peterson was there. We put all the pressure on the passing game, whether it be Carson Wentz or now it's Jalen Hurts. And I think we've got to get away from that. The strength of this team is running the football. You can get away with falling in love with the pass when it's working, I guess. But the problem is for the Eagles, when they become more one-dimensional, they don't play as well. The offense doesn't perform at the same level as it can when they run a balanced approach. And especially going against a team like the New York Giants, who have a great defensive line, and they're going to be able to get the pressure on Jalen Hurts. Given that he is not completely healthy, don't put him in a situation where he's taking unnecessary hits. We're here to win a Super Bowl. We're not here to win just this one game against the Giants. We need to be thinking long term. Run the ball to set up the pass in this game. Slow down the pass rush. Preserve Jalen Hurts. The weakness is going to, I guarantee you, though, they're going to come out, they're going to throw the ball 35 plus times. And that's not what they should do in this game.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they need to establish the run. It's been a very very good outcome whenever they establish the run in their games. I actually need to issue a correction for myself. Darius Slayton was their leading receiver this year, not Kenny Galladay. Kenny Galladay was their leading receiver last year, but even then he didn't even have 600 receiving yards. He had like 500. But I need to correct myself there. So moving on to the Bengals. My biggest vulnerability for the Bengals is pretty obvious. It's their offensive line. Last week, they allowed 4 sacks to Joe Burrow. And this week, he's going against the vaunted defense of the Buffalo Bills. With that defense, we're going to have to get the ball out quickly so that you don't get smashed. But apparently, that really hasn't even worked that much because he still got hit like several times. So to me, without Alex Kappa, Without Lyle Collins, this line is vulnerable. And I think out of every weakness of the Bengals, this is their biggest one.
Absolutely, I agree as well. I remember how I said it. I think it's shattered offensive line or something is what I said here. This team, not only are they missing the two linemen that you just mentioned, but in last week's game, Jonah Williams went down. And when Jonah Williams went down, they ended up bringing in, I can't think of his name right now, Jackson Carman. That's what I was looking for. Jackson Carman came in, and their offensive line looked even worse. The pressure got to Burrow consistently. He only was sacked 4 times, but the pressure was there all the time. And if you're the Bengals, you better be praising God that Von Miller is not in this game, because if he
Right?
was, he'd be teeing off on Joe Burrow. So I agree with you. It's the shattered offensive line of the Cincinnati Bengals, and I think that's what's going to cost them this game.
Yeah, so like you said, your graphic says it's in shambles. I completely agree. Moving on, we have the Buffalo Bills. To me, their biggest vulnerability is their turnovers, specifically Josh Allen. So yesterday or last week, Josh Allen had 2 interceptions, but for the regular season, he had 14 interceptions and 13 fumbles. So just by himself was 27 turnovers or potential turnovers. And that to me is very concerning. He's got a gunslinger mentality. So there's potential there for increased turnovers. And this year he just hasn't been taking care of the ball well. That to me that's a poison pill in the NFL playoffs. If you turn the ball over to great offenses like the Bills or the Chiefs or the 49ers or the Eagles, they're going to make full that opportunity to score some more points. And so you can't allow that to happen. You have to take care of the football. To me, this is the biggest vulnerability of the Bills.
So I wanted to take a moment, if you can bring up my graphic here, and I wanted to talk about the charity work of Josh Allen. So we know that he donates millions through his foundation to children's hospitals. Uh, he helped with debt forgiveness for people in the Buffalo area, in California, and in Wyoming. And he also loves to give away the ball when he's on offense. And that's the point. I agree with you. It's turnovers again. So he is a great person. He is a great person. He does a lot of charity work, but it needs to stop when it's on the field, because if you keep turning the ball over, you talk about the fumbles and interceptions regular season. He fumbled it 3 times last week. Yeah. 3 times. Thankfully for him, he only lost one of those, but he fumbled it 3 times. He threw 2 interceptions. You're enjoying that charity, and I love it. But yeah, I think he could have had 5 turnovers last week. He could have had that many. They barely beat the Dolphins, who started Skylar Thompson. Now you're going against Joe Burr in the playoffs. You can't even see that. I'm too short for my camera, I guess. I'm 6'1". I'm shivering because it's Joe Burr. He's ice cold, baby. He's Joe Cool. And they're going to be, if they do that against the Bengals, I don't even care who's. I could be playing on the offensive line if Joe Burrow is my quarterback with that receiving core, and they could win the game. So let's not do that, Buffalo, if we want to win this game. I think they're going to get enough pressure. I think Josh Allen, I would hope they would limit turnovers. I'd hope that he'd leave his charity work off the field for this game. He's going to need to from here on out, because he's probably going to go up against the Chiefs if they get out of this game. And it doesn't matter who he meets. As they play on the NBA pregame show on TNT, who he play for, who he play against. It won't matter who he play against in the Super Bowl, because he'll either be against the Eagles, the 49ers, or the Dallas Cowboys. And I promise you, if he's charitable to them, they're going to take every dollar they can get, and they're going to win the Super Bowl. So if they want to win a Super Bowl this year, and I don't think they will because of this very reason, I don't trust the Bills. They're my number 1 team in the power rankings because I think they're the most talented team. I think the reason why they won't win a Super Bowl, and the reason why they haven't won a Super Bowl, is because they turn the ball over, especially in big games. And it'll be very interesting to see how this game pans out.
Yeah, stick to DeMar Hamlin's toy drive. Don't donate to Von Bell and that Bengals defense. Comedian Dylan Duker, everyone. He's here all night. I'm going to move on to the Dallas Cowboys. Their biggest vulnerability is their rushing defense. So this is one of my biggest concerns for the Cowboys. They actually allowed the sixth most rush yards in the NFL this season. Demarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons can tee off on offensive lines when they're rushing the passer. But you gotta fill those gaps when you're playing the run. You gotta set those edges, fill those gaps, and keep your eye discipline where it should be. I don't think the Cowboys do that very well. I think if teams really have decent to above average offensive lines, they can generate some push on that Cowboys front seven and get some offensive yards. Clearly, since they've allowed that many rush yards, I can see the 49ers taking huge advantage of this weakness in the Cowboys defense, considering Kyle Shanahan knows how to run the football. He takes after his dad, and I've said it before, he might actually be better in the zone run scheme than his dad, Mike Shanahan. And now he's got prolific weapons in the backfield and some decent depth. So when you have Christian McCaffrey, who can hurt you in every zone of the defense, he is capable of beating you, and you got a solid offensive line with led by the way by Trent Williams, Boomer Sooner. You're going to make some big holes in this defense, and I think you're going to establish the run in a ferocious way.
Some people may think that that red behind you is for the Oklahoma Sooners. It's actually for Duker Sports, but it almost looks the same, so it kind of worked out. It's crazy to me with a team that's as good as the Dallas Cowboys, the number of weaknesses that I could find. I chose turnovers, which I think is going to be the biggest thing here, especially going against the 49ers. But it also could have been like big plays that they allow because they give up a lot of big plays. But we're going to talk about turnovers because this is a team that has the eighth most turnovers in the National Football League on offense. Dak Prescott is I think they're making too big of a deal about it. They threw I think it was 15 interceptions this year. I think they're making too big of a deal about that because I've seen guys throw for over 20 interceptions. I've seen Jameis Winston throw for 30 interceptions. Yeah. So we're beating the heck out of Dak Prescott for throwing 15. Yeah, he led the league. That's not good. You never want to lead the league in that stat. But I don't think he had a horrifically bad season. And I think it's just as much to blame on the offense as a whole as it is to place the blame on Dak Prescott. I think the key will be for them to establish the run. They ran all over the Buccaneers on Monday night, and I think that they'll have to be able to do that going against the San Francisco 49ers as well. Doubly bad, which I'll talk about here in a second with 49ers, is that the 49ers have the fewest turnovers in the National Football League. So they're not going to be giving the Dallas Cowboys additional opportunities, and it is paramount for the Cowboys to return that favor and not give it to them either.
Yeah, I that is a very good point about the Dallas Cowboys. It's one reason why I don't think either of us have them making the Super Bowl this year. I'm going to move on to what I think is the most complete and best football team in the NFL, 49ers. Their biggest vulnerability to me is pass defense. Now, on the surface, we'll probably look at their passing yards and be like, okay, it's not that bad, but it is the 12th most passing yards that they allowed in all of football this season. But really, their worst two performances, one came against the Los Vegas Raiders in that overtime game, and the other one, the Kansas City Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes cooked them for 411 yards and destroyed this 49ers defense. And honestly, it was a blowout loss for the 49ers. I don't think they're the same team that they were earlier in the season, and that was Christian McCaffrey's first game as a 49er, so he definitely wasn't saturated in the playbook. But that defense was completely healthy. Everyone had returned, and nothing changed as far as personnel-wise for the defense, and they got cooked. So I'm concerned about high-flying offenses with a plethora of good receiving weapons and backs in the backfield that can receive and are versatile. I'm concerned about the 49ers actually being able to handle all of that stress. So to me, this pass defense against high-flying offenses is the biggest vulnerability for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, you mentioned it earlier, you had a hard time finding weakness for the Eagles. I had a hard time finding a weakness for the 49ers. I looked for weaknesses in great depth. So, for instance, one thing I looked for is I'm like, we all know how great Brock Purdy has been. But I wanted to know how's the competition that he's stacked up against since he became a starter. And I looked at it, and he's played. Let's see, he's now started 7 games. And the first thing I noticed is that 3 of those 7 games he played a pass defense that was ranked 24th or lower. Uh, However, he did play 2 top 10 defenses in terms of pass defense. And so I set to find how did he fare against those teams. Well, he fared incredibly well. He completed almost 75% of his throws. He threw 419 yards, 4 touchdowns, and only 1 pick. So that's not really a weakness. I looked on the defensive side of the ball, and yeah, I think you said they were gave the 12th most. I think it was the 13th most, but either way, I'm like that might be a weakness, but I actually think it's because they force teams to be one dimensional. Also, they lead most of the time, so they force their opponents into passing the ball more often than not. And for a team that's the case for, being giving up the 13th most, that's not horrific. So I almost am inclined to say they have no weakness. Um, if I had to say one, it's and I don't want to keep betting against Brock Purdy because he's proven me wrong, but it was the reason why I didn't have them going to the Super Bowl. It's the reason why I had the Eagles going to the Super Bowl, because I think Brock Purdy, his being a rookie, being the last pick of the draft, um, I think when he goes on the road, this will be played at home, and I think that's going to help him a ton. But when you go to the Link in Philadelphia in the winter, in a NFC Championship game where that stadium is going to be rocking, I think that's where you might see some inexperience come back to hurt them. However, it's kind of like a pick your poison battle with the 49ers because, as we talked about in the previous episode, it's like, okay, Deebo Samuel gets 160 something all-purpose yards. Christian McCaffrey gets 130 something all-purpose yards. Brandon Ayuk gets 70 something receiving yards. Brock Purdy has the number 1 quarterback rating in the league last week. He also runs for a touchdown. So it's like this team can kill you in any number of ways. So, and they have Kyle Shanahan, who I think he's definitely a top 5 coach in the league right now. There's a strong case that he's the best. And the one thing he does is he puts his quarterbacks in the best position to win and to perform at a high level. And it doesn't really seem to matter who steps in a quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. They always play well. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to say none. They don't have a weakness. So Dallas Cowboys, they're an opportunistic defense. You better force some weakness upon them because otherwise this game could get out of hand. I think the Cowboys are going to play a very passionate brand of football in this matchup. That's why I had it 26-20. But I think this 49ers team is too dangerous. I think they're going to play a pretty good game this weekend, pun intended, and I think they're going to walk away with the win.
Well, there you have it. Not only a comedian, but a football savant, Dylan Duker, and he's got away with words. What can you say?
Yeah, I just came from a city council meeting, so I needed some comedic effect in my life because it wasn't that thrilling. But as always, we appreciate you guys for watching. This was a super fun episode. I hope you guys enjoyed as much as we had, or I guess you have as much fun watching it as we had. There's my way with words coming out again. Yeah. I hope you have as much fun watching this as we did making it. It was kind of late when we shot this video. That I'm gonna blame that. I'm gonna blame there it goes again. I can't speak. So you say that and you jinxed me. You gave the announcer
it's just hard
jinx.
for you to blame your life, your circumstances, or yourself. It's just hard.
Exactly. It's not my fault. Definitely not my fault. I know that. But no, thank you guys again for watching another episode of Duker Sports. We might post another video this week, but most likely it'll be next Monday that we'll be back for you guys. So definitely stay tuned. We'll let you know what we're going to be talking about. And check out the poll that I made earlier today. I want to know who you guys want to win the Super Bowl this year. So definitely stay tuned. And as always, if you want us to talk about something next week for you, let us know in the comments down below. Hope you guys enjoy this weekend and some great football.